Captain Sarah Chun had always been different from the other pilots at Nellis Air Force Base. While her colleagues gathered around tables discussing the latest fighter jets and their sleek designs, Sarah found herself drawn to the unglamely beast that sat in the corner of the hangar like a forgotten warrior. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately known as the Warthog, was not pretty by any stretch of the imagination. Its twin engines sat high on the fuselage like awkward bumps, and its massive 30mm cannon dominated the front of the aircraft like the mouth of some prehistoric creature. Sarah had been flying F-16 Fighting Falcons for 3 years now, earning respect and recognition for her precise flying and tactical awareness. She had graduated second in her flight training class and had completed 2 successful overseas deployments. Her record was spotless, her skills undeniable, and her dedication unwavering. Yet something about the A-10 called to her in a way that the sleek supersonic fighters never had. The opportunity to satisfy her curiosity came during an unexpected moment at the Officers Club on a humid Nevada evening in July. General Patricia Morrison, a decorated combat veteran and one of the few female generals in the Air Force, was visiting the base for a routine inspection. The conversation had turned to the future of close air support missions, and several pilots were debating whether modern multi-role fighters could completely replace the aging A-10 fleet. Lieutenant Colonel Rick Hammond, a veteran F-22 pilot with more confidence than tact, had been holding court at the bar. "The A-10 is a relic," he declared loudly, gesturing with his beer. "We can do everything that old pig can do, but faster and with more precision. It belongs in a museum, not in modern warfare." Sarah felt her jaw tighten as she listened to Hammond's dismissive comments. She had studied the A-10's combat record extensively and knew that the aircraft had saved countless lives during its decades of service. Its ability to loiter over a battlefield, absorb tremendous damage, and deliver devastating close air support was legendary among ground troops. "The A-10 has capabilities that no other aircraft can match," Sarah interjected, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the club. "Its survivability and effectiveness in close air support roles are unparalleled." Hammond turned toward her with a condescending smile. "Captain Chun, with all due respect, you fly an F-16. That's a sports car compared to the A-10. The Warthog is like flying a tank with wings. It's slow, it's ugly, and it handles like a freight train." Before Sarah could respond, General Morrison stepped forward from where she had been quietly observing the conversation. The general was a petite woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen combat in 3 different conflicts. Her presence commanded immediate attention, and the conversation around them gradually died down. "Interesting perspective, Colonel Hammond," the general said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned their rank through blood, sweat, and exceptional service. "Tell me, how many hours do you have in the A-10? Hammond's confidence wavered slightly. "Well, General, I haven't actually flown the A-10, but I've studied its specifications and 0 hours, General Morrison interrupted. "So you're criticizing an aircraft you've never flown based on specifications alone." Her gaze swept across the group of pilots. "Anyone else here have A-10 experience?" The silence that followed was telling. None of the pilots present had any significant time in the Warthog. The A-10 community was small and specialized, and most pilots spent their entire careers in other aircraft types. General Morrison's attention turned to Sarah. "Captain Chun, you seem to have strong opinions about the A-10's capabilities. Have you ever flown one?" Sarah straightened her shoulders and met the general's gaze directly. "No, ma'am, but I've extensively studied its systems and combat history. I believe it's an irreplaceable asset for close air support missions." A slight smile played at the corners of General Morrison's mouth. "Studied, but never experienced. That's the problem with most discussions about the A-10. People form opinions without understanding what it's really like to fly the beast." The general paused, seeming to consider something. Then, in a moment that would change Sarah's life forever, she turned to address the entire group with a mischievous glint in her eye. "You know what, Captain Chin? Since you're so passionate about defending the A-10's capabilities, maybe you should try flying one. Consider it an educational opportunity." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Hammond laughed nervously. General, surely you're joking. The A-10 is a completely different animal from anything Captain Chin has flown. General Morrison's smile widened. I never joke about flying, Colonel. Captain Chin, what do you say? Are you interested in backing up your convictions with action? Sarah's heart raced as she realized the opportunity being presented to her. Flying the A-10 had been a distant dream, something she thought might never be possible given her career track. Now, one of the most respected generals in the Air Force was offering her exactly what she had always wanted. Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied without hesitation. I would be honored to have that opportunity. The general nodded approvingly. Excellent. I'll arrange for you to spend a week at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. They have one of the last active A-10 training squadrons. You'll get a full checkout in the aircraft, including ground school and flight training. Hammond's expression had shifted from amusement to concern. General, with respect, shouldn't there be some kind of formal process for this? Cross-training approvals, command endorsements. Colonel, I am the command endorsement, General Morrison replied firmly. Captain Chun has an exemplary record and the skills necessary to handle the transition. Sometimes the best way to settle a debate is through first-hand experience. As word of the general's challenge spread through the base over the following days, Sarah found herself at the center of intense attention. Some of her fellow pilots were supportive and excited about her opportunity, while others, like Hammond, questioned whether it was appropriate or safe to put an F-16 pilot into such a different aircraft on what amounted to a bet. Sarah ignored the doubters and threw herself into preparation. She spent every free moment studying A-10 technical manuals, watching training videos, and researching the aircraft's history and capabilities. The more she learned, the more impressed she became with the engineering and design philosophy behind the Warthog. The A-10 had been built around its massive Gu-8 Avenger cannon, a 7-barrel rotary gun capable of firing depleted uranium rounds at a rate of nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. The entire aircraft was essentially a flying gun platform, designed to destroy tanks and provide close air support to ground troops in hostile environments. What made the A-10 unique was its emphasis on survivability rather than speed or stealth. The aircraft featured redundant control systems, self-sealing fuel tanks, and titanium armor around the cockpit and critical components. It could continue flying even with significant battle damage, including the loss of an engine, part of a wing, or major sections of the tail. Sarah also learned about the A-10's unusual flight characteristics. Unlike the supersonic fighters she was accustomed to, the Warthog was subsonic and optimized for low-speed, low-altitude operations. Its straight wings and powerful engines gave it exceptional maneuverability at low speeds and the ability to operate from short, rough airstrips close to the front lines. The night before her departure for Davis-Monthan, Sarah received a phone call from her father, Colonel Robert Chun, a retired Air Force pilot who had flown F-4 Phantoms during the Vietnam War. Her father had always been supportive of her career, but she could hear concern in his voice. Sarah, I'm proud that you're taking on this challenge, but I want you to be careful, he said. The A-10 is a demanding aircraft with its own personality. Don't let pride or the pressure to prove a point cloud your judgment. Dad, I'm not doing this to prove a point, Sarah replied. I'm doing it because I believe in what the A-10 represents. It's an aircraft built to save lives and protect our people on the ground. That means something to me. Her father was quiet for a moment. Your grandfather would have understood that motivation. He flew P-47 Thunderbolts during World War II, providing close air support for ground troops in Europe. The A-10 carries on that tradition. The connection to her family's military heritage strengthened Sarah's resolve. She had always felt a deep responsibility to honor the service of those who came before her, and now she had an opportunity to experience firsthand the type of mission that had defined her grandfather's war. As Sarah packed her flight gear and prepared for the journey to Arizona, she reflected on the series of events that had led to this moment. General Morrison's challenge had been unexpected, but it felt like destiny. For too long, the A-10 had been dismissed and underestimated by pilots who had never experienced its unique capabilities. Sarah was determined to approach the training with an open mind and complete respect for the aircraft and the pilots who flew it in combat. She knew that flying the A-10 would be unlike anything she had ever experienced, and she was ready to embrace the challenge. The drive to the airport the next morning was filled with anticipation and nervous energy. Sarah had faced many challenges in her flying career, from her first solo flight to combat missions overseas, but this felt different. This was an opportunity to step outside her comfort zone and experience something entirely new. As her flight to Arizona lifted off from Las Vegas, Sarah looked down at the Nevada desert and thought about all the A-10 pilots who had trained in those same skies. Soon, she would join their ranks, even if only temporarily. The general had joked about trying to fly the A-10, but Sarah was determined to prove that she could not only fly it, but excel in it. The challenge ahead was daunting, but Sarah Chun had never backed down from a challenge in her life. The A-10 was waiting, and she was ready to meet it head-on. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona greeted Sarah with scorching heat and the distinctive smell of jet fuel mixed with desert dust. As her rental car approached the main gate, she could see rows of aircraft baking in the intense southwestern sun. Among the various military aircraft scattered across the flight line, the unmistakable silhouettes of A-10 Thunderbolts stood out like predatory birds waiting for action. Major Jake Rodriguez, Sarah's assigned instructor pilot, met her at the squadron building with a firm handshake and an evaluating look. Rodriguez was a combat veteran with over 2,000 hours in the A-10, including deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. His weathered face and confident demeanor spoke of someone who had seen real combat and lived to tell about it. "Captain Chun, welcome to Warthog Country," Rodriguez said with a slight grin. "I've heard about your situation from General Morrison. Word travels fast in the A-10 community, and, frankly, we're curious to see how an F-16 pilot handles our little tank killer." Sarah followed Rodriguez through the squadron building, noting the walls covered with photographs of A-10s in various combat situations and memorials to pilots who had made the ultimate sacrifice. The atmosphere was different from her F-16 squadron. There was a sense of pride mixed with practicality, an understanding that beauty took a back seat to effectiveness. "Before we get you anywhere near an aircraft, you need to understand what you're dealing with," Rodriguez explained as he led her to a briefing room. "The A-10 isn't just a different airplane. It's a different philosophy of warfare. Everything about it is designed around one mission: keeping our guys on the ground alive." The ground school phase of Sarah's training was intense and comprehensive. She learned about the A-10's unique systems, from its redundant flight controls to its unusual engine placement. The twin General Electric TF-34 turbofan engines were mounted high on the rear fuselage, a design choice that protected them from ground fire and foreign object damage while operating from rough airstrips. Sarah discovered that the A-10's famous durability came from careful engineering rather than just heavy armor. The aircraft featured redundant hydraulic systems, manual backup controls, and a titanium bathtub around the cockpit that could withstand direct hits from small arms fire and shell fragments. The landing gear was designed to be lowered manually if all else failed, and the aircraft could land safely with significant structural damage. The weapons systems training revealed the true complexity of the A-10's mission. Beyond the massive GU-8 cannon, the aircraft could carry an enormous variety of ordnance on 11 external hardpoints. From precision-guided Hellfire missiles to cluster bombs, rockets, and electronic warfare pods, the A-10 was a flying arsenal capable of adapting to virtually any ground support scenario. "The cannon is what everyone talks about, but it's just one tool in the toolbox," Rodriguez explained during a weapons systems briefing. "The real skill is knowing which tool to use when, and how to employ them effectively while staying alive in a dangerous environment." Sarah spent hours in the A-10 simulator, learning to manage the aircraft systems while dealing with simulated emergencies and combat scenarios. The simulator sessions revealed just how different the A-10 was from her F-16. The flight controls were heavier, the aircraft's responses were more deliberate, and the whole experience required a different mindset. "Stop trying to fly it like a fighter," Rodriguez advised during one particularly challenging simulator session. "The A-10 doesn't want to go fast or pull high G-forces. It wants to go low and slow and stay there for hours. Learn to work with the aircraft instead of fighting it. The breakthrough came during Sarah's third day of simulator training. Instead of trying to impose her F-16 techniques on the A-10, she began to listen to what the aircraft was telling her. The heavy controls weren't sluggish, they were precise and deliberate. The slower responses weren't limitations, they were features that allowed for careful, accurate weapons delivery in challenging conditions. "That's it," Rodriguez said as Sarah successfully completed a complex close air support scenario in the simulator. "You're starting to think like a warthog driver instead of a fighter jock." Sarah's first actual flight in the A-10 was scheduled for Thursday morning, and she barely slept the night before. All her preparation had led to this moment, her chance to experience firsthand what it was like to fly the legendary tank killer. The pre-flight inspection of the aircraft was unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. The A-10 was massive compared to her F-16, with a wingspan of nearly 58 feet and a length of over 53 feet. Standing next to the aircraft, she could appreciate the engineering that had gone into its design. Every surface seemed purposeful, from the titanium armor plating to the carefully positioned sensors and antennas. Rodriguez walked her through the inspection process, pointing out the aircraft's unique features and potential problem areas. "The A-10 is a tough bird, but it still needs respect and proper maintenance," he explained. "These aircraft have been flying for over 40 years, and every hour in the air is precious." Climbing into the A-10's cockpit was like entering a different world. The seat position was higher than in the F-16, giving Sarah an excellent view of the aircraft's surroundings. The instrument panel was a mix of traditional analog gauges and modern digital displays, reflecting the aircraft's long service life and ongoing upgrades. "Everything you need for the mission is right here," Rodriguez explained as he strapped into the back seat. "Navigation, weapons, targeting, communications, it's all designed around keeping you alive while you keep the ground troops alive." Starting the engines was a ritual that Sarah found almost ceremonial. The TF-34 engine spooled up with a distinctive whine that was completely different from the sharp roar of the F-16's single engine. As the engines reached idle power, Sarah could feel the aircraft settling into readiness like a big cat preparing to hunt. "Davis Monthan ground, Hog 21, request taxi for local training mission," Sarah called over the radio, using the A-10's traditional call sign designation. "Hog 21, taxi to runway 12, wind 120 at 8, altimeter 29.92. Taxiing the A-10 was an education in itself. The aircraft's tricycle landing gear gave it a different ground attitude than the F-16, and the nose-wheel steering required a gentler touch. As they approached the runway, Sarah could feel the anticipation building. "You have the aircraft, Captain Chun," Rodriguez announced as they reached the runway threshold. "Show me what an F-16 pilot can do with a real airplane." Sarah advanced the throttles and felt the A-10 begin to accelerate down the runway. The acceleration was steady but not dramatic, nothing like the violent thrust of an afterburning fighter engine. Instead, it was purposeful and inexorable, like a freight train gathering momentum. As the airspeed indicators showed rotation speed, Sarah gently pulled back on the stick. The A-10 lifted off with dignity rather than aggression, climbing steadily into the clear Arizona sky. For the first time in her life, Sarah Chun was flying the legendary Warthog. "How does it feel?" Rodriguez asked from the back seat. Sarah took a moment to process the sensations flooding through her. The A-10 felt solid and reassuring in a way that was completely different from the twitchy responsiveness of her F-16. It was like the difference between riding a thoroughbred racehorse and piloting a massive ship. Both had their place, but they demanded entirely different skills. "It feels like flying a piece of history," Sarah replied honestly. "Like everything about it has been proven in combat." Rodriguez chuckled. "That's because it has been. Every system, every procedure, every technique we use has been paid for with blood and validated in real combat. The A-10 doesn't look pretty, but it gets the job done." They spent the next hour practicing basic flying maneuvers, allowing Sarah to get a feel for the aircraft's handling characteristics. The A-10 was remarkably stable and forgiving, even when pushed to its performance limits. Its stall characteristics were benign, and recovery was straightforward and predictable. Try some tactical maneuvers, Rodriguez instructed. Show me how you'd avoid a surface-to-air missile. Sarah rolled the A-10 into a steep bank and pulled hard, expecting the sluggish response she had anticipated based on the aircraft's reputation. Instead, she was surprised by the aircraft's agility at low speeds. While it couldn't match the instantaneous response of a fighter, the A-10 could maneuver effectively in the low-altitude, low-airspeed regime where it was designed to operate. The secret is understanding the A-10's strengths, Rodriguez explained as Sarah practiced evasive maneuvers. You don't try to outrun missiles. You use terrain masking, decoys, and surprise. The aircraft's small infrared signature and ability to fly very low make it harder to target than you might expect. As the flight continued, Sarah began to understand why A-10 pilots developed such loyalty to their aircraft. It wasn't about speed or glamour. It was about capability and reliability. The A-10 was an aircraft that could be trusted to bring its pilot home and complete the mission under the worst possible conditions. During the approach and landing phase, Sarah experienced another aspect of the A-10's unique character. The aircraft's excellent forward visibility and stable approach characteristics made it easy to fly precise patterns, even in challenging conditions. The landing gear was robust and forgiving, designed to handle operations from rough field conditions. As they taxied back to the parking area after the flight, Rodriguez offered his assessment. Captain Chun, you've got good instincts, and you're adapting well to the aircraft. But this was just an introduction. Tomorrow we start weapons training, and that's where the A-10 really shows its capabilities. That evening, Sarah called General Morrison to provide an update on her progress. The general listened carefully as Sarah described her first day flying the A-10 and her growing appreciation for the aircraft's unique capabilities. I'm beginning to understand what makes this aircraft special, General, Sarah reported. It's not about individual performance parameters. It's about how all the systems work together to accomplish the mission. That's exactly right, Captain, General Morrison replied. The A-10 represents a different approach to air power, one that's focused on results rather than statistics. How are you handling the transition? Better than I expected, ma'am. The aircraft demands respect, but it rewards careful flying and tactical thinking. I'm looking forward to the weapons training. Excellent. Keep me informed of your progress. I have a feeling this experience is going to be more valuable than either of us anticipated. As Sarah prepared for bed in her base quarters, she reflected on the day's events. Flying the A-10 had been everything she had hoped for and more. The aircraft had exceeded her expectations in every way, from its handling characteristics to its obvious combat potential. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she learned to employ the A-10's formidable weapons systems. But tonight, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that she was capable of mastering this legendary aircraft. The general's challenge was turning into something much more significant than anyone had anticipated. The weapons training phase of Sarah's A-10 checkout began with a sobering briefing about the realities of close air support missions. Major Rodriguez stood before a large screen displaying gun camera footage from actual combat missions, his expression serious as he addressed Sarah and 3 other pilots undergoing training. Close air support is the most dangerous and demanding mission in military aviation, Rodriguez began. You're operating at low altitude in a high-threat environment, with friendly forces often within danger close distances of your targets. One mistake can kill the people you're trying to protect. Sarah watched intently as the footage showed A-10s engaging enemy positions in Iraq and Afghanistan. The pilots' calm voices over the radio contrasted sharply with the violence unfolding on screen as 30mm cannon rounds and precision missiles destroyed enemy vehicles and fortifications. The A-10's weapon systems are designed for precision and flexibility, Rodriguez continued. But the most important weapon system in this aircraft is the pilot's brain. Technology can help you find and engage targets, but only human judgment can ensure you're hitting the right ones. The ground training covered every aspect of the A-10's offensive capabilities. The famous Gu-8 Avenger cannon was indeed the aircraft's signature weapon, but Sarah learned that modern A-10 missions relied heavily on precision-guided munitions. Hellfire missiles, laser-guided bombs, and GPS-guided dams allowed the aircraft to engage targets with minimal collateral damage. The cannon gets all the attention, but these Hellfires are what we use most often in current operations, Rodriguez explained, pointing to images of the aircraft's missile systems. They're precise, they're deadly, and they minimize the risk to nearby friendly forces. The cannon is still important, but it's just one tool in the toolkit. Sarah's first weapons training flight was scheduled for Friday morning, and the aircraft was configured with inert training rounds for the cannon and practice missiles that would simulate actual weapons employment. As she conducted her pre-flight inspection, Sarah noticed the subtle differences in the aircraft's configuration. External fuel tanks had been replaced with weapons pylons, and the massive gun barrel protruding from the nose seemed even more prominent. "Today we're going to start with basic gunnery," Rodriguez announced as they strapped in for the flight. The Maverick range has targets set up to simulate enemy vehicles and positions. Your job is to learn how to employ the cannon effectively while maintaining situational awareness and following proper engagement procedures. The flight to the range took them over the stark beauty of the Arizona desert, with the A-10 cruising at 20,000 feet to conserve fuel before descending for the weapons passes. Sarah was becoming more comfortable with the aircraft's characteristics, but she knew that adding weapons employment would introduce new levels of complexity. Maverick range, HOG-21 checking in for scheduled gunnery training, Rodriguez called as they approached the range complex. HOG-21, Maverick range, you're cleared hot on targets 1 through 5, pattern altitude 8,000 feet, egress to the north. Range is cold except for your aircraft. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as they descended toward the range. This was what the A-10 was built for, and she was about to experience it firsthand. The aircraft's heads-up display showed target information and weapon status as they approached the first target. "I've got the aircraft," Rodriguez announced, taking control for a demonstration pass. "Watch how I set up the attack run and manage the aircraft's energy." Sarah observed carefully as Rodriguez rolled the A-10 into a shallow dive toward a tank target on the range floor. The approach was deliberate and controlled, nothing like the high-speed, high-G attack profile she was accustomed to in the F-16. Instead, Rodriguez flew a precise, calculated approach that allowed for maximum accuracy. "Trigger down," Rodriguez announced as he opened fire with the cannon. The sound was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Even through her flight helmet and the aircraft structure, the GU-8's distinctive BRRT was overwhelming. The entire aircraft vibrated as the 7-barrel cannon spat out 30mm rounds at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. The target area erupted in clouds of dust and debris as the depleted uranium training rounds impacted around the tank target. Rodriguez held the trigger for only 3 seconds, but in that time the cannon had fired nearly 200 rounds. The effect was devastating. "Your aircraft," Rodriguez announced as he pulled up from the target area. "Show me what you can do." Sarah took control and began her approach to the second target. Everything she had learned about energy management and precision flying came into play as she lined up on the target. The A-10's gun sight was sophisticated but required skill and practice to use effectively. As she rolled into the attack run, Sarah focused on maintaining proper airspeed and dive angle while keeping the target centered in her gun sight. The approach felt natural despite being completely different from anything she had done before. The A-10 seemed designed for this type of precise, controlled attack. "Trigger down," Sarah announced as she pressed the firing button. The cannon's roar was even more intense from the pilot's seat, and she could feel the aircraft slow slightly from the tremendous recoil. She held the trigger for the prescribed 3-second burst, then pulled up and banked away from the target area. "Outstanding first pass," Rodriguez commented. "You hit the target area and maintained good aircraft control throughout the run." "How did it feel?" "Incredible," Sarah replied honestly. "I can see why ground troops love this aircraft. The firepower is amazing." They continued with multiple gunnery passes, allowing Sarah to refine her technique and build confidence with the weapon system. Each pass brought improvement as she learned to read the ballistics computer and compensate for wind and target movement. The next phase of training introduced precision-guided missiles, and Sarah discovered an entirely different aspect of modern close-air support. Using the aircraft's targeting pod and laser designator, she learned to identify and engage targets with Hellfire missiles from standoff ranges that kept the aircraft out of most ground threats. Modern CAS is about precision and discrimination, Rodriguez explained as Sarah practiced target identification procedures. We can engage individual vehicles or even specific rooms and buildings without causing collateral damage. It's a far cry from the area weapons of previous generations. Sarah's progress exceeded everyone's expectations. By the end of her third day of weapons training, she was successfully employing both cannon and missile systems with accuracy that impressed even the veteran instructor pilots. Her F-16 background had given her excellent situational awareness and tactical thinking skills that translated well to the A-10 mission. Captain Chun, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I rarely see someone adapt this quickly to the A-10, Major Rodriguez told her after a particularly successful training flight. You've got natural instincts for close air support, and you understand what the aircraft is capable of. The final test came during a complex scenario that combined multiple target types, simulated threats, and coordination with ground forces. Sarah would need to demonstrate not just weapons employment skills, but also the tactical decision-making that made A-10 pilots so valuable to ground commanders. The scenario involved a simulated convoy under attack, with enemy forces positioned in multiple locations around the friendly forces. Sarah would need to prioritize targets, coordinate with ground controllers, and employ appropriate weapons while avoiding fratricide and minimizing collateral damage. Hog 21. This is Groundhog 6. We are taking effective fire from enemy positions to our north and east. We have wounded and need immediate close air support, came the radio call from the ground controller as Sarah approached the exercise area. Sarah quickly assessed the tactical situation using her targeting pod and began prioritizing threats based on their danger to the friendly forces. The scenario was realistic and demanding, requiring split-second decisions and precise weapons employment. Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah successfully engaged 6 different targets using a combination of cannon fire and precision missiles. She coordinated closely with the ground controller, confirmed each target before engagement, and adapted her tactics as the scenario evolved. Hog 21. Outstanding support. The ground controller radioed as the exercise concluded. All threats neutralized with no friendly casualties. Thanks for keeping us alive out there. As they flew back to Davis-Monthan, Rodriguez was effusive in his praise. Captain Chun, that was one of the best initial CAS performances I've ever seen. You demonstrated tactical awareness, weapons employment skills, and, most importantly, the judgment needed to operate safely in a complex environment. Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment as they landed back at the base. She had not only learned to fly the A-10 but had demonstrated proficiency in its most demanding mission. The challenge that had begun with General Morrison's casual suggestion had become a transformative experience. That evening, Sarah received another call from General Morrison, who had been closely monitoring her progress through reports from Davis-Monthan. Captain Chun, I understand you've exceeded all expectations during your A-10 training, the general began. Major Rodriguez tells me you have natural aptitude for close air support missions. Thank you, General. The training has been incredible. I have a completely new appreciation for what the A-10 and its pilots bring to the fight. I'm pleased to hear that. In fact, I have a proposition for you. The Air Force is considering expanding cross-training opportunities between fighter and attack communities. Would you be interested in serving as a test case for a formal exchange program? Sarah's heart raced as she processed the general's offer. The possibility of continuing to fly the A-10, even part-time, was beyond her wildest dreams. Yes, ma'am, absolutely. I would consider it an honor to continue working with the A-10 community. Excellent. When you return to Nellis, we'll discuss the details. Your performance has opened some eyes at the Pentagon about the value of cross-pollination between different aircraft communities. 3 days later, Sarah found herself back at Nellis Air Force Base, but she was a changed pilot. Word of her successful A A-10 checkout had spread throughout the base, and even Colonel Hammond approached her with grudging respect. "Captain Chun, I heard about your performance at Davis-Monthan," Hammond said during an awkward conversation in the squadron building. "I may have been too quick to dismiss the A-10's capabilities." "The aircraft speaks for itself, sir," Sarah replied diplomatically. "It's an incredible platform with unique capabilities that complement our fighter missions." General Morrison's visit to Nellis the following week brought Sarah's story full circle. During a briefing to the base's senior leadership, the general used Sarah's experience as an example of the importance of keeping an open mind about different approaches to air power. Captain Chin's success in the A-10 demonstrates that excellent pilots can adapt to different missions and aircraft types, General Morrison explained to the assembled officers. Her experience has also shown us that the A-10's capabilities are often underappreciated by those who haven't experienced them firsthand. The general's casual joke about trying to fly the A-10 had indeed led to something that shocked everyone, including Sarah herself. She had not only successfully mastered one of the Air Force's most demanding aircraft, but had also opened new possibilities for cross-training and cooperation between different aviation communities. 6 months later, Captain Sarah Chun was selected as the first pilot in a new exchange program between fighter and attack squadrons. She would spend half her time flying F-16s in air-to-air missions and half her time flying A-10s in close air support roles. Her unique perspective and dual qualifications made her a valuable asset to both communities. The A-10 that had once sat in the corner of the hangar like a forgotten warrior was now a symbol of possibilities for Sarah. She had proven that excellent pilots could excel in any aircraft when they approached it with respect, dedication, and an open mind. The general's challenge had changed not just Sarah's career, but also the Air Force's thinking about pilot training and aircraft utilization. As Sarah walked past the A-10 in the hangar during her final day at Nellis before transferring to her new assignment, she paused to appreciate the aircraft that had transformed her understanding of military aviation. It was still not pretty by conventional standards, but, to Sarah, it was beautiful in its purposefulness and proven capability. The joke had become reality, and the reality had exceeded everyone's expectations. Sometimes the best opportunities come from the most unexpected challenges, and Sarah Chun had proven that courage and skill could overcome any obstacle. Even the daunting prospect of flying a legendary tank killer that everyone said was impossible to master.